Edouard Anthony, c'est professeur, il est professeur à Aix-Marseille Université. Il vient du CEREGE, hein. Donc c'est un des plus grands spécialistes mondiaux de la dynamique côtière. Donc il a travaillé en Amérique du Sud, en Afrique, en Asie du Sud-Est, en Méditerranée, sur le Language Channel, la mer, enfin partout en fait dans le monde. Donc c'est Monsieur Géomorphologie côtière. Donc il nous fait l'honneur en fait de venir faire une présentation assez synthétique de tous les travaux qu'il a menés sur de l'embouchure de l'Amazone jusqu'au Venezuela. Donc je laisse la parole à mon cher ami Edouard.
Merci beaucoup, Christophe. Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon to you all. Well, I'm a coastal geomorphologist, so sediment dynamics and coastal geomorphology are not really at the forefront of biodiversity. I'm sure you'll agree with me on that. But when we look at mangroves, there is a bearing on biodiversity. So let's just say the talk is bio-inspired. That was said this morning. I quite liked that expression. The substance of the talk comes from what I call the team. We've been working for several years together, and simply the team's humble spokesman for this afternoon. So we'll be talking about mangroves, the interaction between mangroves and sediment dynamics and coastal geomorphology on the Guiana's coast, looking specifically at the three Guianas: French Guiana, Suriname, and Guyana. And of course, I'll try to show that there's a vital link between mangroves and long-term coastal sedimentation, okay? While at the same time toning down expectations we might have from mangroves concerning coastal protection and this kind of stuff. And of course, there'll be something on future outlook regarding the evolution of this coast. So, of course, you all know about the mangrove ecosystem services, so I won't go into that. Let's just dwell on the geomorphic and the geological ecosystem services. We talk about coastal protection. That's well known, of course. And here you've got an idea of a valuation, of course, of coastal wetland services dominated by mangroves for the year 2015. Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, thousands of lives saved by wave attenuation by mangroves. And then you've got the less well-known land building role, which of course goes on to blue carbon sequestration in mangroves, in mangrove sediments. The land building role, of course, depends fundamentally on the availability of sediment. So I think this is really very important. Mangroves actually, they grope around, they grab the sediments and they set on the sediment. So I think that's important. Okay, so let's go through a very brief inventory of the mangrove system on in the three Guyanas, but also looking at the population, because I think it's very important. The way mangroves have been maintained along the three Guyanas. 90% of about 1.6 million people live on the coast in the three Guyanas. We've got two extremes in terms of the way mangroves actually have been maintained in these three countries. French Guiana, of course, fairly pristine state. Mangroves are protected by EU water directives. We've got some erosion of abandoned polders in the Mana area. And at the other extreme, we've got Guyana, which is the largest of the three countries, a much smaller band of mangroves. There's been massive coastal urbanization in Guyana. This has been going on for over a century. Large-scale secular removal of mangroves with polders and dikes, and a new policy of costly mangrove rehabilitation. So we've got here the blueprint with just these two countries in seeing actually how humans have affected mangroves and the way this vital link can be endangered with sea level rise. Suriname has got a fairly ambiguous position on mangroves. There's strong urban pressures in Paramaribo, Wanica, and Koroni, but there's also the willingness somehow to preserve mangroves in this country, in Suriname. Okay, so the talk will revolve around three themes. The first of these themes, of course, is the importance of sediment supply and wave transport of mud from the Amazon source. Very, very important source, of course, the largest river on Earth, and massive sediment supply. So the entire mangrove interaction with sediment is subordinate to the availability of mud from the Amazon. And then we look at basically from a process framework, the coastal hydrodynamics, sedimentation, protection, and long-term land building. And then this will set the templates for mangrove degradation, and we'll actually see how this degradation throws light on the long-term link with sedimentation and the future of the Guyana's coast. I was banking on 30 minutes, but it's 20 minutes now. So system subordination to wave-driven Amazon mud. There's a need here to insist on the overarching importance of mud from the Amazon. We've got the largest estuarine mud reactor here at the mouth of the Amazon, and the mud is transported longshore in mud banks towards the Guianas. And what remains of these mud banks, of course, ends up in the Orinoco, down the deep sea canyon of the Orinoco. So 20% of the 1 billion tons of mud from the Amazon. These form individual mud banks that we're very familiar with, because you've got all these banks along the coast here. And these periodicity of the banks and the interbank areas is fundamental in terms of the geomorphic evolution of the coast and the role mangroves play in this evolution. So this is a synthetic view of what happens along the coast. We've got the short-term to mesoscale dynamics of the mud banks and the interbank area. Short-term, of course, is strongly dependent on wave energy from the northeast, trade wind waves dominant. So you've got the mud bank, and here we'll put the focus on the roles of mangroves. Just grab the pointer. So here we've got wave energy coming in. We've got the trailing edge, which is eroded, and mud is transferred to the leading edge. Mangroves are there at the back along the shoreline, so they extend offshore, and this contributes to what we call the land building role. And of course, mangroves take the brunt of wave energy in the exposed interbank area where you have no mud bank, where you have no mud bank. And this is their coastal protection role. So we'll be looking at this contribution to land building, protection of the shoreline, mesoscale, short term, and then long term. Okay, so the mangroves, of course, on the Guyana's coast are really bold colonizers of mud banks. You can actually see this very, very rapid process. But we know that over periods of 50 to 60 years, the coastal variation is really dramatic on the Guyana's coast, up to 500 meters a year. This process is so rapid and extensive that it annihilates concerns on natural mangrove loss or mangrove recovery. We shouldn't be worried here about whether mangroves can recover or get lost. But this basically concerns the French Guiana coast. It's not the same thing in Guyana. The same goes as far as mangrove contribution to further trapping of sediment is concerned. This is generally considered as an important ecosystem service. It's irrelevant on the French Guiana coast. There's so much mud coming along. So we insist on the overarching importance of the large mud supply from the Amazon. Okay, so this plan view shows, of course, the fluctuations of the shoreline, mangrove shoreline over the 50-year period, with the transitions from stable mangrove areas with bank, interbanks, very dynamic fluctuating shoreline, okay, within a net long-term progradational framework. So the whole shoreline, of course, with each mud bank session and interbank session, there's a gain in land over the long term. Not necessarily over a period of 50, 60 years. You can have massive erosion, but there's a net long-term gain in land that has built up the Guyana's coastal plain. Now, the implication of this is that potential coastal sediment accommodation space, which is the space along shore where sediments can accumulate and which is controlled by sea level, of course. If we take an SPP of 3370, that is a 1 meter sea level rise in 2031, we're probably confident in saying that this space may be infilled by sustained high mud supply from the Amazon. This mud supply is so high that I don't think we should worry about that aspect. So looking at the hydrodynamics and the process framework, of course, we've got different stages of mangrove growth. And as they grow, mangroves consolidate the substrate. They attach part of the accumulating mud bank to the coast. what we call mud welding. This is their short-term land building role on the Guyana's coast. So you've got all this system that gropes around and actually stabilizes the substrate. But we've got fundamental questions here that are still unanswered. What is, for instance, the added value of mangrove substrate consolidation to the geotechnical strength of Guyana's coastal mud? This, of course, contributes to the resistance to erosion of coastal mud in French Guiana. So if we look at the erosional situation, here we've got these shoreline fluctuations, of course, that reflect massive erosion. Erosion can initially exceed 1 kilometer a year, but this energy dissipation by mangroves helps in slowing down interbank shoreline erosion. Okay, this is fine, but we've still got work to do on how this goes on. Because the dissipation of wave energy, generally the dissipation is very high at the bottom because you've got friction with the base there, and you've got these mangrove roots, of course. And you've got a virtuous circle that's initiated by mangroves. They contribute to dissipation of wave energy. You can actually see that the wave energy is rapidly dissipated. This leads to sedimentation. So they, at that same time, since wave energy is low, they can actually grab the sediment, grope around and colonize this sediment. But there's also a question here, how is wave energy, waves and surge, of course, storm surge, dissipated by Avicennia? We don't know. I mean, there's been no studies on Avicennia germinans. And what is the efficiency of this species, including with various mangrove widths? Width is very important, of course, because the wider the mangrove fringe, of course, the better the dissipation is. Okay, so but Avicennia germinans is straight, tall trees with no prop roots, shallow rooting, and short pneumatophores. So how does this play out in terms of wave dissipation? This is something we actually need to find out, and we've embarked on studies on this aspect. So if we look at this Florida example, of course, the wider the width, we've got width in French Guiana and Suriname as well. The width is there. I mean, this mangrove fringes can be quite wide. So there's a lot of surge reduction, as you can see here, percentage of surge reduction, and the inundated area at the back. With this Florida example, a wide mangrove fringe is a guarantee for more efficient coastal protection. Okay, but at the same time, we've got mangroves contributing at the geological time scale, long time scale, to below ground organic sedimentation that adds up in the coastal plain sediment mass. This is, of course, complementary to the land building role. But here again, we've got a basic question, important question. How much underground biomass is stored in the muddy Holocene sediment mass of the Guyana's coast? So there must be quite a substantial amount down there, but we don't know about this at all. So if we summarize regarding these contributions, basically what happens is you've got this variations in mud banks, interbanks, erosion. The net result, this is, sorry. What's important here is the net result, of course. And this is what we see here. We've got this progression over several years, decades, okay? And this is what's shown in this slide here. You've got the net, there's a net, sorry, very, very sensitive system. You've got a net gain over geological time scale. So we gain, whether there's erosion or not, in the long run, we actually gain land with sedimentation. And this is really aided by mangroves. So we've got this successive bank and interbank phases, but there's net long-term progression. Okay, so if we look at the example of the geology of Suriname, for instance, we've got all this huge pile of mud along the coast that forms the Guyana's coastal plain, so several kilometers of progression. You can actually see that sand forms slivers of deposits within this mud pile, okay? And of course, much of this mud is rich in mangrove organic matter, but we don't know to which extent. Okay, so just a word of caution regarding the role of mangroves. Mangroves are much less efficient than sandy beaches and cheniers in dissipating wave energy. So don't go imagining that the best dissipator of wave energy on Earth is mangroves. You've got it wrong. The best dissipators of wave energy, of course, are beaches. I mean, they're built for that. You know, sandy beaches, gravel beaches as well. Sandy beaches and cheniers protect from waves. They need to be protected from sand mining as well. But they're not land builders, unlike organic mangroves. Mangroves are actually land builders. But I'll also say, touche pas à mon sable, ni sur les plages, ni dans les fleuves. Okay, so if we look at the, so how do we link up the sediment dynamics, roles 1A, 1B, with the geological development, role 2? We do this by actually monitoring the impacts of anthropogenic mangrove removal on mud welding onshore. This removal, of course, undermines net long-term shoreline progression, but it also annihilates organic input into the coastal plain sediment mass. So there's a net loss here from all points of view. Okay, so this is the third part of the talk. So when we look at the situation in terms of anthropogenic modification, of course, Guyana stands out because you've had a long secular history of diking of the coast, got a huge agricultural land all the way to the border with Suriname. And these dikes, of course, are various types of dikes, especially essentially rock dikes, okay? But at the same time, and this, of course, means, of course, that if you look at there's hardly any mangroves. Huh? You've got remnants here. You've got a drainage canal here. So there's not much in terms of mangroves, and we'll see why. But at the same time, Guyana has realized that mangrove protection is fundamental to the stability of the coast. Because when you put dikes, I have nothing against hard gray solutions like dikes, but make sure they do the job. And there's a problem with dikes in these countries, developing countries. These dikes take in a lot of money in terms of maintenance. So the impact of dikes summarized, very simply summarized here. Dikes impede mangrove propagule exchange between mature forests and new sediment. They impede freshwater supply to young mangroves. This is fundamental for young mangroves, but especially from a geomorphic point of view, they generate foreshore deepening through wave energy reflection and strong longshore mud transport. This impedes mud welding and leads to more mobile mud banks that don't weld onshore. So here we've got this dissipative foreshore initially, then we place a dike, and the mud bank goes just streaming along the coast and there's erosion. Okay, so very, very simple scheme here showing the virtuous role played by mangroves and the nefarious role played by dikes here, because you've got this wave reflection from the dike, and this wave reflection, of course, transports mud offshore, so the bed is eroded, and this deepens the foreshore, so it prevents mangroves from actually re-establishing even when a mud bank comes along. So this is a fine example, of course, of the part of the Georgetown seafront. Here you've got a dike, okay? You can actually see you've got these big waves coming in, and there's dissipation right here where you've got the mangroves. And since you've got big waves coming along, you get currents, longshore currents generated from the high waves to the low waves. And this, of course, undermines the sediment you've got at the back there. So this is how the situation looks like. Of course, you get this dike. There's a reflection of wave energy. It's got this example from Winterwap, a colleague in Suriname. And of course, as the foreshore deepens, it prevents mangrove colonization, because mangroves need a relatively high substrate to get installed on these mud banks. So, and the mud becomes more mobile as well. So the mud banks just stream alongshore, and that explains why on the Guyana coast, you don't have any mud alongshore, except for very, very small patches. We've got the same, we had the same problem in French Guiana, mind you, and in the Mana area, we had some polders that were emplaced. And following the emplacement of these polders, there's been massive erosion, of course, and this erosion still goes on. I mean, there's no recovery in this sector of the Mana coast. We've got this wave reflection here, steep foreshore. Waves are reflected, and as they reflect, of course, all the mud that comes alongshore is deflected offshore, transported offshore. So if we look at the situation in Suriname, of course, mangrove removal plus poor dike maintenance spells exposure to erosion risks. I mean, you can build dikes. I think it's necessarily building dikes, and there's no way we can do without dikes in many countries, such as Netherlands, Belgium, northern France. But when you build dikes, you make sure they do the job. So here we've got an example of remnants of a dike constructed in 2013 in Wegnazi, and it just got destroyed a couple of years later. And at the same time, I was talking about the ambiguous attitude of the Suriname government. See, you've got all this land development just north of Paramaribo in this area, and these all old mangroves that are being actually cut down. So this is really very, very bad, I think. Okay, so once mangroves are removed, natural regeneration is commonly very patchy, and it occurs only in bank phases. So you need to have the mud banks coming along, which can take several years, of course. And replanting is very costly and uncertain due to poor knowledge of context and site conditions. So I mean, it's really ludicrous having to replant mangroves with so much mud streaming along shore. It's very, very unfortunate, really. Here we've got a mangrove nursery, okay, young mangroves planted here with these dams, bamboo dams. But I mean, it's extremely labor intensive and the returns are quite unpredictable. So if you look at the range of reported costs for mangrove restoration, this is probably outdated data, but you can actually see that it's really very expensive, okay? 100 times 20 meter swathe of replanted mangroves in Guyana went for between 6,000 and 20,000 US dollars. That was in 2012. So it's really a very, very expensive thing trying to replant mangroves because the recovery rates are generally fairly poor. Okay, so dikes are costly to maintain, but their failure can result in dramatic consequences. We've got this example at Mahiakoni with spring tides, high waves, wet season waves. You can actually see these big waves coming in and the dike has been breached. And this resulted in catastrophic flooding and damages because you need years to recover the agricultural lands at the back with saline water coming in. Okay, so we'll end up with this these few items. The future of sea level rise with mangroves on the Guyana's coast. To what extent will sediment accumulation space created by sea level rise be infilled by larger aggradation relative to progradation if the Amazon mud supply is sustained? Let me say this in very simple terms. We've got massive progradation, okay? So if sea level rise goes up, we don't need all that much progradation, but we need some aggradation to compensate for the sea level rise, okay? So I think this is quite possible if the Amazon mud supply is sustained. There's no reason why we should imagine that the Amazon mud supply wouldn't be sustained. This would depend, of course, on damming in the Amazon. It's such a big river that this shouldn't be a problem in the coming century, at least. And except if there's a change in the wave direction, okay, related to interactions between the atmosphere and the Atlantic Ocean. I don't see how. I mean, that's not in any model at all. So if now we can look at the future of sea level rise without mangroves on the Guyana's coast, we would have active alongshore advection of mud towards the Orinoco. So this is where we see how mangroves play a role, because they actually stabilize these mud banks. Okay, they lead to welding of some of the mud. There's a possibility that we would have larger interbank erosion of the coastal plain, or the interbank erosion could be mitigated by a switch to locally more active chenier formation. There's a lot of sand lying out there coming down the rivers. So, I mean, we shouldn't touch the sand in the rivers as well, but this can actually mitigate interbank erosion with sea level rise in the coming decades. There'll definitely be a slowdown in coastal progradation because the accommodation space associated with sand and compared to massive Amazon mud, but that would be streaming alongshore if you don't have the mangroves. There would be a slowdown in coastal progradation. There would also be, of course, I think, impeded blue carbon storage. This could be compensated by back chenier lagoonal wetlands. It's possible. It's something that needs to be explored. And of course, the idea of carbon release from older organic rich coastal plain deposits could occur because the coastal plain would be reworked by waves. So this will add to the carbon release, of course, from these organic rich coastal plain deposits. Thank you very much indeed.
Merci Edouard pour cette présentation qui montre quand même comment l'apport de connaissances peut être essentiel au futur du territoire guyanais et plus largement de la région sous influence des sédiments amazoniens. Si vous avez des questions, c'est le moment. Je vais garder le micro avec moi et on va peut-être continuer avec ce micro-là pour les speakers. Voilà. Des questions? Oui, Jérôme.
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation. Tout à l'heure, Jean-Paul Metzger a présenté justement des exemples avec des coûts, bénéfices des différentes stratégies de protection. Et en fait, ce que tu as montré, c'est vraiment le cœur de cette analyse. Et je voulais voir ton avis sur cette analyse, justement, et sur sa pertinence, à ton sens.
C'est un point très important parce que c'est le nerf de la guerre, hein, finalement. C'est-à-dire combien ça va coûter, en fait. Alors, on a ici une ressource, donc la mangrove, qui est gratuite, disons, qui est donnée par Dieu. Non, mais c'est vrai. Et puis, on a la vase qui arrive. On a la vase qui arrive, qui est donnée par Dieu aussi, mais par l'Amazon aussi, par les Brésiliens. Bon, disons, c'est pas grave. Mais, non, mais on a tout ça, et puis on s'évertue quand même, peut-être par manque de connaissance de la dynamique, donc à défricher la mangrove. Et une fois qu'on défriche la mangrove, ben, en fait, les conditions de pente, de dynamique sont telles que la régénération, en fait, devient extrêmement difficile et difficilement atteignable par la replantation. Parce que souvent, on parle de replantation un peu partout dans le monde, mais il ne faut pas se leurrer, hein. C'est un business, c'est très, très cher et ça donne quand même des résultats qui sont souvent assez mitigés. Donc, je pense qu'il est quand même très important. L'exemple guyanais est tout à fait exemplaire, hein, et c'est pour ça qu'il faut peut-être plus de collaboration, de coopération. C'était le but d'un projet qui a capoté avec le Covid, etc., qui s'appelle Guyacost. L'idée, c'était de travailler avec les Brésiliens, donc de l'Amazone jusqu'à l'Orénoque, pour avoir en fait un point de vue commun sur la nécessité de préserver la mangrove. Au Guyana, ça me semble difficile, hein, parce que là, avec les digues, je ne sais pas comment ils vont faire. Bon, c'est compliqué. Mais enfin, il faut rehausser les digues, hein, peut-être. Parce que ce n'est pas interdit d'avoir des solutions en dur, mais il faut les maintenir comme il faut. Donc, je pense que c'est une question très, très importante. Ça va coûter cher.
Une autre question? Moi, j'avais une. J'aimerais que tu. C'est quelque chose que bon, on se connaît depuis longtemps. C'est quelque chose qui nous épate, qui nous rend humble en fait par rapport à ce qu'on voit quand on regarde l'océan. Les bancs de vase modèlent la géomorphologie du littoral guyanais. Les mangroves se développent ou pas sur les bancs de vase ont pour l'instant plutôt tendance à se développer. Il y a des endroits où elles ne se développent pas. J'ai bien retenu que les chenilles étaient le maximum, offraient le maximum de potentiel de lutte contre l'érosion. Quel est l'avenir des bancs de vase? Comment tu vois l'évolution en fait à la fois de cette morphologie? Peut-être que tu peux rappeler les dimensions, hein, les volumes par rapport aux sorties amazoniennes et comment ça va, comment cette migration du sud-est vers le nord-ouest aura tendance à évoluer.
Oui, en fait, juste rappeler quand même qu'un banc de vase, c'est plusieurs années du sédiment qui sort de l'embouchure de l'Amazone, hein. Donc, c'est pas tous les ans qu'il y a un banc de vase, hein, lié au... Ah oui, ça va, c'est bon. Donc, c'est pas tous les ans, en fait, que le débit solide de l'Amazone va créer un banc de vase. Non. Il faut des années et des années. D'accord? Donc, on avait calculé, par exemple, le volume total de ces bancs de vase. Et dans ce contexte-là, il est clair donc, que ce qui sera déterminant dans l'avenir, on va mettre à côté le niveau de la mer. On sait que ça va monter. D'accord? Ben, c'est simple. Je pense que c'est l'énergie disponible. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a un critère ici qui est primordial et qui permet d'ailleurs ces bancs de vase de transiter le long du littoral, c'est l'énergie de la houle. Alors, comment est-ce que cette énergie va évoluer? Des prévisions vont vers une augmentation, en fait, une intensité plus importante, donc des cyclones, etc., parce qu'il y a une part d'énergie générée par les... Et il y a les alizés aussi, d'accord? Donc, comment est-ce que ça va évoluer par rapport au climat du continent sud-américain, parce que l'intensité, etc. Donc, l'énergie de la houle sera primordiale, et puis la présence de mangroves. Alors, les mangroves, que le niveau marin monte ou pas, voilà, donc, ils seront toujours là, hein. Elles sont opportunistiques. Donc, il faut absolument préserver la mangrove, s'attendre quand même à une plus grande mobilité des bancs de vase avec une énergie plus grande et moins de progradation. Mais sincèrement, avec la quantité de vases qui viennent de l'Amazone, je ne suis pas inquiet. Ouais, il ne faut pas créer trop de barrages sur l'Amazone, hein. Voilà.
Oui, la Guyane, c'est quand même un chantier unique de travail pour les recherches dans le monde. Voilà. Au travers de l'étude des mangroves, on aborde des thématiques de gestion du territoire qui là remontent jusqu'à la cordillère des Andes. Voilà, donc merci, grand merci.
On ne peut pas généraliser, il faut se méfier quand même de généraliser ce qui se passe sur ce littoral des trois Guyanes concernant le rapport entre la mangrove et le sédiment. Ce n'est pas du tout la même chose ailleurs. Je pense que c'est important de le souligner.
Grand merci, Edouard, pour cette présentation.